Your vulnerability is your nature. Look at your hands. Are they trembling? If they are not, it is only a matter of time. You are accustomed to considering yourself safe, surrounded by the walls of laws, morality, and social contracts. But this is an illusion, a fragile house of cards built atop primordial chaos. You are a biological object in a world where the only real currency is the will to power. Hierarchy here is not built on diplomas or merits, but on the ability to absorb the will of others, turning those around you into fuel for your own expansion. While you are reading these lines, someone more efficient, devoid of your sentiments, is already analyzing your weak points. He sees your need for approval, your fear of conflict, and your slavish habit of making excuses. Your problem is that you believe in justice. This is a comforting fairy tale invented by the weak to somehow limit the strong. But nature does not know this word. In biology, there are only two states. You are either expanding or fading away. Friedrich Nietzsche did not write for the consolation of the human, all too human. He wrote for those who are ready to recognize the predator within themselves, capable of cold, mathematical calculation. Your civilized polish is simply a thin layer of enamel on fangs that you have forgotten how to use. You are prey until you learn to use silence as a noose and understatement as a poison. Your openness is your nakedness. Your honesty is your defenselessness before the world of those who do not play by the rules. We are beginning a deep investigation into how one man, finding himself at the epicenter of total betrayal, cast aside morality and used an icy strategy of understatement to make his enemies choke on their own paranoia. This is not a success story. It is a chronicle of a rebirth from a victim into the architect of someone else's nightmare. Welcome to the real world. There is no pity here. There is only strategy. Chapter 1. The Information Vacuum. The Art of Silence as a Noose Phase. The Collision. The boardroom of Atlas Corporation smelled of ozone from working servers and expensive perfume that could not hide the stale scent of fear. Mark sat at the end of a long table made of polished obsidian. The surface of the table was so smooth that the distorted faces of those present were reflected in it, turning them into grotesque masks. Opposite him was Victor, the vice president. Victor's face resembled a wax cast, perfectly smoothed skin behind which decades of corporate intrigue were hidden. His eyes, motionless and devoid of the thermal spectrum, were focused on the bridge of Mark's nose. This is an old trick, to look not into the eyes but slightly above them, to cause the interlocutor an unconscious feeling of discomfort and oppression. Mark, Victor's voice was soft, like a cat's paw sliding over velvet. The audit has revealed a shortage of 2 million in your sector. We all understand. Mistakes happen. Stress, market pressure, perhaps unfortunate investments. Just tell us now which of your subordinates provided the signatures for these transactions, and we will resolve this as a family, without the police, without publicity. Just give us a name, and you will keep your seat. Mark felt something break inside him. A cold lump rose from his stomach to his throat. His pulse, usually steady, jumped to 95 beats per minute. He knew this was a frame-up, dirty, primitive, executed with that arrogant confidence that absolute power provides. Mark's pupils dilated. His sympathetic nervous system was preparing for a fight-or-flight response. He saw how the right corner of Victor's lips twitched upward almost imperceptibly, only by 3 millimeters. It was a micro-signal of triumph. Victor was already celebrating victory. He expected Mark to start fussing now, sweating and choking on excuses, thereby recognizing the very legitimacy of the accusation. He is waiting for my speech, flashed through Mark's head. His brain has already built neural chains to refute any of my arguments. Every word of mine will become material for his next strike. If I start making excuses, I will voluntarily put on a collar. He wants information to control the situation. Therefore, he will not receive information. Mark did not answer. He slowly placed his hands on the table, palms down, feeling the deathly cold of the obsidian with his palms. He looked Victor straight in the eyes, but not with defiance, but with the icy calmness of a pathologist. 1 second passed, 5 seconds, 10. In the room, the hum of the air conditioner became audible, a low, monotonous sound with a frequency of about 50 hertz. This hum is usually ignored by the consciousness, but now it turned into a pressing mass, forcing the rest of the board members to press themselves into their leather chairs. Victor adjusted his tie. His fingers lingered at the knot for a fraction of a second, a classic gesture of self-correction when a predator loses confidence that the prey is paralyzed. "Mark, do you hear me?" A barely noticeable crack appeared in Victor's voice, a high note of irritation that betrayed his growing anxiety. His brain, accustomed to the immediate reaction of a victim, encountered a void. Mark continued to remain silent. He tilted his head slightly to the side, like a wolf studying the strange behavior of a wounded deer. The silence in the room became tangible. It sucked in reality like a black hole. The members of the board of directors began to exchange short, anxious glances. Mark's understatement forced them to fill the void with their own worst suspicions. Each of them thought, "Why is he so calm? Does he have recordings of our conversations? Has he already leaked compromising material to the shareholders?" Phase, psychological X-ray. What happened at that moment? Victor applied cognitive suppression. By presenting a false but heavy accusation in a high social pressure environment, he expected to cause an amygdala hijack in Mark, a state where the emotional center of the brain blocks the prefrontal cortex responsible for logic. But Mark intuitively chose the strategy of an information vacuum. In terms of social interaction, silence is the absence of an expected stimulus. The projection effect. The human brain biologically cannot tolerate uncertainty. When we do not receive feedback, our subconscious begins to project its own hidden fears onto the opponent. Victor, being an experienced manipulator, judges by himself. His brain began to feverishly generate hypotheses. Is he silent because he has already called for an audit? Or does he have a copy of my hidden account? Biological background. A powerful release of cortisol began in Victor. His brain, accustomed to dominating through verbal control, encountered a prediction error. The body began to spend colossal resources on processing the void, which led to a rapid exhaustion of the nervous system. His irritation is a symptom of panic caused by the loss of predictability of the environment. Lesson number 1. Your silence is a mirror in which the enemy sees his fears. Never fill the silence first. The one who spoke first after a long pause has acknowledged his hierarchical subordination. Silence is a space where the enemy hangs himself on his own paranoia. Phase. Sensory immersion. The office windows overlooked a gray, smog-choked metropolis. The sky was the color of stale asphalt, heavy and pressing. The hum of the city below resembled the sound of the surf, indifferent to human tragedies. Inside the office, the sterile cleanliness, the cold light of the LED panels, and the smell of ozone created the atmosphere of an operating room. Mark felt how the cold of the obsidian table was passing into his own veins, turning his blood into liquid nitrogen. He was no longer a part of this room. He had become an observer from the outside. Chapter 2. False Vulnerability, the Trap of the Wounded Beast. Phase. The Collision. A week passed. Mark knew that every step of his was being watched by Victor's eyes. He needed to give them food, but not the kind they were looking for. He deliberately chose the bar at Karen's, a place with a dubious reputation, frequently visited by André, Victor's head of security and his main watchdog. The bar was plunged into twilight, diluted by neon signs that buzzed like a swarm of disturbed insects. Mark sat at the bar, slouching as if the weight of the whole world lay on his shoulders. His jacket was slightly wrinkled, his tie knot was loosened, and the top button of his shirt was unfastened. He ordered a double whiskey and stared into the glass for a long time, imitating the glassy stare of a person in deep depression. His fingers nervously fiddled with a damp napkin, tearing it into small, messy pieces, a classic sign of high anxiety. André sat down next to him. He smelled of expensive tobacco and that specific self-confidence that belongs only to people endowed with the right to legal violence. He placed his hand on Mark's shoulder in a proprietary manner, slightly squeezing the trapezius muscle. "You look terrible, Mark." Andre's voice was full of fake sympathy. "Victor says you have completely broken down. You know, I have always treated you well. Perhaps you want to talk it out. I know you are not guilty. You were simply framed by circumstances. Tell me what is on your mind, and I will try to soften the blow." Mark flinched, too sharply, too theatrically. It was a flawless imitation of fright. I just do not know how to get out of this, André. They have everything under control. I found some files in the archive, old reports from last year. There are such figures there. But I do not know what to do with them. I do not have the strength to fight. Mark fell silent abruptly, as if frightened by his own frankness. He covered his mouth with his palm, a gesture of suppressing the truth. "What files? Where are they now?" Andre's eyes flashed with a predatory gleam. The hunting instinct kicked in instantly. He saw before him a broken man who, in a moment of weakness, was ready to surrender his trump cards. "Forget it. It is not important. I will not be able to decrypt them anyway. There is double coding there. I will just leave it. Health is more precious. I will sign the confession tomorrow if Victor asks." Mark reached for the glass, but his hand trembled, and a drop of whiskey fell onto the polished surface of the bar. He immediately began to fussily wipe it with his sleeve, demonstrating a complete loss of control and dignity. "Eat this, scum," Mark thought, looking at Andre's reflection in the mirror behind the bar. "Your primitive brain is already painting you a bonus from your master. You see a corpse before you that can be gnawed upon. You are so blinded by my fall that you will not notice how I am tightening the noose around your neck." André swallowed the bait. In his picture of the world, Mark was defeated, and a defeated enemy is a source of resources. He was no longer analyzing Mark's words for logic. He was simply recording the presence of prey in the form of mysterious files. Phase, psychological X-ray. Mark applied the strategy of false vulnerability. In ethology, this is called a distraction display, the halo effect in reverse. In social psychology, there is a cognitive bias. If a person looks outwardly disorganized and weak, we automatically attribute cognitive helplessness to them. André fell into the trap of the stereotype, the dopamine loop. The anticipation of an easy victory caused a dopamine release in André. This substance narrows the focus of attention, forcing one to ignore details that do not fit into the desired picture. André stopped noticing the oddities in Mark's behavior because his brain had already bought the reward for capturing the compromising material. Triangulation via a false target. Mark created a phantom, the files in the archive. Now, Victor's entire security service will spend resources searching for something that does not exist, leaving Mark's real flanks unprotected but invisible. Lesson number 2. If you want to attack, pretend to be prey. Let the enemy feel superiority, and his vigilance will fall asleep under the weight of his own vanity. A true predator never growls before pouncing. He whimpers pitifully, luring the victim closer. Phase. Sensory immersion. The bar was stuffy and sticky, the smell of spilled beer mixed with the scent of cheap cleaning products. The dim yellow light of the lamps made people's faces look like wax masks. But to Mark, this gloom seemed cozy. In this sticky darkness, he felt like a chess player who had just sacrificed a queen to declare a checkmate in 10 moves from which there would be no escape. Chapter 3. The Destruction of Reality. Gaslighting in Reverse Phase. The Collision. Victor summoned Mark to his office late in the evening. The office was plunged into darkness. Only the lamp on Victor's desk caught his hands, nervously fingering lapis lazuli prayer beads out of the dark. The hum of the air conditioner in the empty building sounded like the breathing of a giant beast. Andre told me about your visit to the bar, Mark, and about the files from the archive, the old reports. Give them to me now, and we will forget about your debt. Consider this your last chance for redemption. Mark looked at Victor with an expression of absolute, crystal-clear bewilderment. He held a pause for 4 seconds, exactly long enough for Victor to feel the first sting of doubt in his own rightness. Files? What files, Victor? What are you talking about? Victor frowned. His voice became harsher, and metallic notes broke through it. Do not play games with me. The bar at Charon's. You told Andre yourself about the archive and the double coding. You were drunk and crushed. Mark smiled gently, almost sympathetically. It was the smile of an adult looking at a child's fantasies. Victor, are you sure Andre is all right? I have not been to a bar this week. Furthermore, I do not drink whiskey at all since I started having stomach problems. I was at the Olympus gym. They have cameras everywhere. I can order a transcript of my training sessions. Andre must be overworked. Or, Mark made a meaningful pause. Or he is starting to play his own game. Why would he invent a story about files that do not exist? Perhaps he found something dirty himself and is now trying to frame me to divert suspicion from himself. Are you sure he is still loyal to you? Mark saw how the gears of paranoia began to turn in Victor's brain. He was not just lying, he was creating a new coordinate system in which Andre was transforming from a loyal dog into a suspicious conspirator. Phase. Psychological X-ray. This is a strategy of radical pragmatism in the form of counter-gaslighting. Cognitive dissonance. Victor received 2 mutually exclusive pieces of information. Mark's confidence, backed by a reference to objective evidence, the gym alibi, forced Victor's brain to look for an error in the source. It is easier to accuse Andre of hallucinations or betrayal than to admit that Mark is a grandmaster of manipulation. Paranoia as a biological mechanism. In hierarchical structures, the fear of betrayal by one's own is the strongest evolutionary stressor. Mark shifted the focus of Victor's aggression from himself to his closest associate. He forced the predator to doubt the loyalty of his pack. This is a classic division of the enemy camp from within without a single shot fired. Lesson number 3. Your truth is what you impose with absolute cold-bloodedness. Reality is plastic. If you are convincing enough in your denial, those around you will begin to doubt their own memory and the loyalty of their allies. Chapter 4. Radical Pragmatism. Cutting off the excess phase, the collision. There was a knock on Mark's office door. It was Elena, his former colleague, a woman with whom he shared not only projects but also, as it seemed to him, something more. She entered. Her eyes were red from tears. Her hands were trembling slightly, clutching a leather bag. It smelled of rain and her usual perfume, which now caused only irritation in Mark. Mark, Victor found out about our meetings outside the office. He is threatening to fire me and ruin my reputation so that I will not find a job even in a basement. He demands that I sign testimony against you regarding that 2 million tranche. Help me. Tell me what to do. I do not want to betray you, but I am afraid. Mark looked at her. Previously, just a month ago, he would have rushed to comfort her, offered money, protection, a way out. But now he saw before him not a person, but a biological instrument that Victor was using for emotional pressure. He analyzed her tears as a chemical composition intended to cause an oxytocin release in him and force him to make a strategic mistake. Helena, Mark's voice was devoid of any intonation. It was the voice of a surgeon announcing an inevitable amputation. Do what you consider necessary for your survival. I owe you nothing. We are adults, and each of us bears responsibility for our own choice. Elena froze. Her crying stopped instantly, replaced by a mask of icy amazement. But Mark, you said, we is a memory that no longer has value. Mark interrupted her, looking straight into her pupils. If you sign those papers, I will destroy your life the very next day. I have evidence of your machinations with the reporting for the last quarter, those very errors that I corrected for you. You did not think I had forgotten about them, did you? This is not personal, Elena. This is pure calculation. Choose. Either you go to Victor and tell him you have nothing to say, or we both go to the bottom. But you will fall first. Elena saw a stranger before her. In his gaze there was not a drop of warmth, only the cold steel of pragmatism. Manipulation through pity, the main weapon of the weak, shattered against the granite of his new will. She realized that this man was no longer a part of the old reality where feelings worked. Phase, psychological X-ray. Mark overcame social coercion. We are biologically programmed to help our own. This is an ancient survival mechanism of the species. But in the conditions of an individual war, this mechanism turns into a deadly vulnerability. Emotional deprivation. Rejecting empathy allows one to see the situation as a mathematical problem. Mark realized that Elena was simply a lever being pulled by Victor. By ceasing to react to the lever, he deprived Victor of power. Threat as a deterrent tool. Instead of giving in to blackmail, Mark applied counter-blackmail. He used the fear of loss, which in the limbic system is always stronger than the thirst for gain. He turned a potential witness for the prosecution into a neutralized zone. Lesson number 4. Pity is a luxury you cannot afford when your head is on the chopping block. Cut off any emotional attachments if they turn into knife handles that enemies stab into your back. Be ready to burn bridges so the enemy cannot cross them. Chapter 5. Transcendent Silence. Power over the future phase. The collision. The day of the decisive board of directors meeting arrived. Victor looked like a triumpher before a parade. He laid out folders with evidence of Mark's guilt before the shareholders, carefully prepared by his team. In the hall sat people whose fortunes were measured in billions. Their faces were impenetrable as granite. Gentlemen, Victor began, his voice vibrating with the anticipation of the finale. Today we will close a shameful page in the history of Atlas. Mark, you have the last word before we vote for your immediate dismissal and the transfer of materials to the prosecutor's office. Mark stood up slowly. He did not bring any folders or a laptop with him. His hands were demonstratively empty. He did not look at Victor. He walked to a huge panoramic window and turned his back to everyone, looking at the city, which seemed like a cluster of ants below. "You are all waiting for me to make excuses," he said in a quiet but surprisingly deep voice that seemed to vibrate within the very walls of the building. "You are waiting for figures, graphs, and words about my loyalty to the company. But the truth is that Atlas Corporation is already dead. While you spent weeks trying to pin a theft of 2 million on me, I created an autonomous structure in an offshore zone which, over the last 3 days, has absorbed 40% of your key accounts receivable through a series of assignments of rights. In 48 hours, your shares will turn into garbage unless I enter the confirmation code for the merger with my new holding." Mark fell silent. He did not explain the details. He did not show confirmations. He simply left them in a state of absolute uncertainty. Silence reigned in the hall. Victor opened his mouth but could not utter a sound. His brain was frantically trying to understand. Is this a bluff or reality? No, the absence of data made any analysis impossible. The shareholders began to turn pale. Mark's understatement created a scenario of the apocalypse in their heads, which was much more terrifying than any reality. Phase. Psychological X-ray. This is the culmination of the will to power, the creation of a new reality. The Zeigarnik effect. Our brain biologically cannot tolerate unfinished actions and incomplete information. By speaking of a structure and falling silent, Mark launched an endless cycle of paranoia in the directors' heads. They will think of the scale of the catastrophe themselves, and they will do it much more effectively than he could describe. Inversion of hierarchy. The one who owns information about the future owns the present. Mark did not fight for a place in Victor's system. He announced that Victor's system no longer exists. He shifted the game from the field of who is to blame to the field of how do we not become impoverished. Lesson number 5. Do not fight by the rules of the system. Create a system in which you set the rules. Your main strength is not in what you declare, but in what you remain silent about, forcing your enemies to tremble from their own fantasies. Give them a void, and they will fill it with their fear. Chapter 6. Biological Dominance. The language of the Overman phase. The collision, Victor snapped. His vaunted self-control, which he had accumulated over the years, burst like a stretched guitar string. He jumped up, knocking over a massive chair. His face was covered in crimson spots. White foam appeared in the corners of his mouth. "This is a bluff, a dirty, stinking bluff of a cornered rat. You could not have done anything. You are a non-entity, Mark. Guard. Escort him out of here immediately." Mark turned slowly. His movements were fluid and economical, like those of a large predator. He did not make a single unnecessary gesture, not a single fussy movement. He walked up to Victor closely, chest to chest, violating all conceivable rules of proxemics, intimate zone less than 15 centimeters. The guards froze, paralyzed by his absolute confidence. Mark did not shout. He leaned in and whispered directly into Victor's face, so close that Victor could feel his steady, almost frightening breath. "Look at your hands, Victor. They are trembling. Your pulse is now over 120 beats. Your adrenal glands are releasing so much adrenaline that your thoughts are getting confused, and your vision is narrowing to a tunnel. You have already lost biologically because you have lost control over your animal nature. You are simply a frightened monkey in an expensive suit. Look at me. My pulse is 65. I am as calm as a gravestone. You bark because you are afraid. And I am silent because I am already full of your defeat. Victor recoiled as if from a physical blow. Mark's cold calmness acted on him more powerfully than any shout. He saw in Mark's eyes not hatred, but something much more terrible, complete, absolute indifference. That is how one looks at dust on one's boots. Phase, psychological X-ray. Mark applied the method of ethological dominance. Mirror neurons. In any social group, individuals subconsciously copy the emotional state of the leader. But Mark refused to enter into emotional resonance with Victor's aggression. With his icy calmness, he emphasized Victor's biological inadequacy, making him, in the eyes of those around him, a weak, sick male who is no longer capable of leading the pack. Control of physiological markers, the ability to suppress external signs of stress, sweating, trembling, voice changes, is read by the subconscious as a sign of overwhelming inner strength. Mark used biological facts as a weapon, striking at the very foundation of Victor's identity. Lesson number 6. Your body is your main manifesto. Control your breathing, pulse, and gestures. The one who remains cool-headed at the epicenter of chaos is automatically read by the system as an alpha object. Strength is not in the shout, but in the ability to look at the enemy's rage as if it were the sound of rain. Chapter 7. Revaluation of values. Victory through defeat. Phase. The collision. The board of directors, gripped by panic and paranoia, voted for Victor's immediate resignation and the start of an internal investigation into his own activities. He was led out of the hall by his arms. He looked 20 years older. Mark remained alone with the shareholders. One of them, an old man with a face etched with the wrinkles of experience, approached him. "Well, Mark, you have won. We admit, your decision was radical. The vice president's position is yours. Furthermore, we are ready to discuss transferring 10% of the company's shares to you. Just stop the takeover and return the assets. You are now the new Atlas." Mark looked at him. Years of struggle for this very position, for these very figures in his account, flashed through his head. But now this leather chair and these percentages seemed to him like a wooden box lined with velvet. He felt a strange, almost frightening lightness. "I do not need your position," Mark answered, and in his voice there was a sincere, almost childlike joy. "I used Atlas as a laboratory rat. I trained my will on you. Now that I have understood how this primitive mechanism works, it has become uninteresting to me. I am leaving. My structure really exists, and it will bring me much more than your dusty offices. I will not destroy you. You will manage it much better yourselves." He placed his electronic pass, broken in half, on the table and walked out without waiting for an answer. Phase. Psychological X-ray. This is the highest point of Nietzschean philosophy, self-overcoming, and the transition to the state of the overman. Rejection of resentment. Mark did not take revenge on Victor for the sake of satisfying his ego. He outgrew the very need for revenge. For him, Victor ceased to be an enemy and became simply spent material in the process of his evolution. Transcendence of the goal. Victory within the system is still a form of slavery to the system. True victory is the ability to leave the battlefield at the moment of triumph because your goals are no longer measured by the criteria of your enemies. Lesson number 7. The goal of any struggle is not the destruction of the opponent, but the expansion of your own horizons. Become someone who no longer needs the trophies of this system to feel his superiority. Your main victory is freedom from the very necessity to win. Chapter 8. The Final Silence. The departure of the predator phase. Sensory immersion. Mark walked out of the glass doors of the skyscraper. It was raining, a heavy cleansing downpour that washed away the dirt accumulated during the day from the asphalt. He held his face up to the cold streams, feeling how they washed away the dust of office intrigues, the smell of ozone, and fake smiles from him. The city around him seemed like a huge living organism in which he was now not a cell, but a neuron capable of changing the entire network. The phone vibrated in his pocket. It was a message from Victor, short, filled with a final despair. "How did you do it? How did you know about the accounts?" Mark looked at the screen. He remembered Victor's face in his last moment of power, a face distorted by the fear of the void. Mark smiled and, without hesitation, threw the phone into a deep storm drain. He will not answer. Never. Understatement is the last, longest nail in the coffin of Victor's peace. Victor will replay this scenario until the end of his days, trying to find logic where there was only pure, unfiltered will. He will search for files, study structures, and suspect Andre and Elena. He will forever remain trapped in the snare that Mark built for him out of his own fears. And Mark was already walking forward, dissolving into the crowd. His steps were light and noiseless. His heart beat steadily, 60 beats per minute. Ahead was the whole world, and this world did not yet know that a new architect of reality had appeared in it. Lesson number 8. The last word must always belong to silence. Leave your enemies with questions without answers, and you will become their eternal obsession, a ghost that has deprived them of peace forever. Your disappearance is the loudest shout they have ever heard. Now you have passed through this. You have seen how Mark transformed his vulnerability into an absolute weapon. But do not be deluded. This is not a recipe for happiness. It is a tool for survival in a world where empathy is considered a design defect, and honesty is an invitation to the butchering of a carcass. Vasha unprotectedness has not gone anywhere. The world is still teeming with predators who are waiting for your mistake. But now you have the fangs of silence. Use them wisely. Remember, every word of yours is a bullet that you voluntarily hand over to the enemy. Conserve your ammunition. Be above their petty laws. Be colder than their miserable passions. Be more dangerous than their boldest expectations. Give them understatement, and take their peace forever. Note: this text is an artistic and analytical study of psychological strategies. We call for the conscious and ethical use of these techniques in real life. Remember, the will to power requires iron discipline.